Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop news. I'm absolutely fascinated by this new tabletop news channel. It's right here on YouTube, and I think it goes beyond the channel. It's a tabletop news is an attempt to make a real news source to cover the news in tabletop role-playing games specifically. Now, and actually, if you ask them, they might be like, well, we also cover CCGs and we also cover, board games, blah, 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 blah. But first of all, like, honestly, they are listing a lot of tabletop role-playing game news material, right? And that means they have to be role-playing game specific. And the reason why is tabletop role-playing games are not even remotely the largest tabletop segment, right? Both board games and CCGs are much larger than role-playing games. But the majority of the stories on tabletop news, from what I can tell, or at least the ones that are put forward most prominently, are role-playing games. So this is, they're saying tabletop news, they're giving themselves some room to move, but I think they're prioritizing role-playing game products. And what I want to talk to you about today is I think they are purposely, it is my humble opinion, that they have made, there was a meeting and they have said, do not say Dungeons & Dragons on tabletop role-playing game, on tabletop news, right? So I just watched episode 3. I encourage you to go over to Tabletop News's YouTube site and watch episode 3 and tell me if I'm wrong. I think this is correct, right? They never mentioned Dungeons & Dragons once, even though they talk about Dungeons & Dragons multiple times. A good example of this is they talked about Critical Role played Wembley Stadium. Critical Role didn't play Wembley Stadium. Dungeons & Dragons was played in Wembley Stadium. That's the real event, right? Like, nobody cares that it was Critical Role, right? Dungeons & Dragons is way bigger than Critical Role. Critical Role is just one of multiple actual play teams, right? But the reality is, Critical Role didn't play Wembley Stadium. Dungeons & Dragons played Wembley Stadium. And Tabletop News did an entire episode and never once said the words Dungeons & Dragons. And this is my point. Like, watch it. Watch the episode. Tell me if I'm wrong. You'd have to work to do that, right? You'd have to plan it. You'd have to have a meeting, and say, hey, we're covering tabletop role-playing games. But listen, everybody, and this is what I think was said. This I am positing this. In my humble opinion, some exec was like, listen, we're covering tabletop role-playing games, right? But just like the character sheet on comicbook.com, just like Professor Dungeon Master, just like Bob World Builder, we all despise Dungeons & Dragons. It's our bread and butter, Ginny D, right? Like, it's our bread and butter. It's what's going to feed us all at night. But let's despise it. Let's make sure we hate it. Let's not say it's Voldemort now. Can't say its name. Right? And that's my point. Tell me if I'm wrong. Like, look at it, right? They talk about Dungeons & Dragons multiple times. They talk about products, events that would not happen without Dungeons & Dragons, that are very Dungeons & Dragons specific, that are going to be used on Dungeons & Dragons more than all the other products combined, but they never say it. And what I'm saying is that was planned. That was carefully planned, in my humble opinion. There was a meeting, right? And they were like, hey, Dungeons & Dragons is our bread and butter, but don't you dare say the name. Don't say the name. And why can't you say, well, why? Hey, boss, why can't we say the name? Well, you know why, right? We need to do what everybody does on Twitter and on YouTube. We need to say that Hasbro D&D is stupid. And then we all need to forget that Hasbro outsells all its competitors all the time combined, right? And if we say their name, it's very hard to not just have a D&D show. And yeah, you're right. Because if you're going to cover events in the tabletop role-playing game space, you're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons nonstop. And the reason why is OSR and Indie never do anything that's worth celebrating. Never do anything that's prominent. Never do anything that's significant. Never do anything that's innovative, right? It's just at the macro level. Every now and then there's a spark. But if you need to put on news every single week, D&D is going to be coming out of your mouth constantly, unless you made a rule to not allow it. And that's what, and so I guess I'm not a drinker, but if I was, I'd make a drinking game out of this. And I think if you took a shot every time they talk about something that is D&D specific or involves D&D events or involves D&D products or involves D&D in any way, but they didn't say D&D, you'd be drunk before half the show was over, right? You'd have alcohol poisoning, right? And so this is my posit. It is my humble opinion. Tabletop Role-Playing Game News has made a rule that Dungeons and Dragons is not allowed to be said on the show, and I think they locked it in on episode 3, and I think going forward you will not hear Dungeons and Dragons mentioned on Tabletop News, and I think it's calculated, and I think it's cruel, and I think it's wrong. And you know what? I'm hoping I'm wrong on this. I hope I'm wrong on this. And also, maybe me just saying, hey, I see what you're doing, be enough to stop it. I think that's what's happening, in my humble opinion. I'm inviting correction here, right? Take a look at Tabletop, take a look at episode 3. You tell me if you think that was not on purpose. I think that was 100% on purpose. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing and have a wonderful millennium.